May 1979, Broken Bay, where the Hawkesbury River opens its mouth to the Pacific Ocean. George and Jan Keeley had moored their houseboat for the night in the sheltered waters of the bay. The weather had turned. A storm rolled in across the estuary, wind pushing waves against the hull. And then the boat lurched. Not a sway, not the roll of heavy weather. A lift, sudden, powerful, as though something had surfaced directly beneath them and shouldered the vessel upward from the water. The houseboat was physically lifted from the river before splashing back down. They scrambled topside into the storm, trying to make sense of what had just happened. And there, moving out across the bay through the darkness and rain, they saw it. An enormous body, a long neck rising from the water. A serpent-headed beast cutting through the waves toward open ocean. It was there, and then it wasn't. The storm swallowed it. The water closed over the space where it had been. When they later told friends what they'd seen, the response surprised them. Others had stories too. Others had seen something in the Hawkesbury that shouldn't exist. Welcome to Strewth, the podcast where we explore Australia's most perplexing mysteries. And this is the story of the Hawkesbury River monster. The Hawkesbury stretches 120 kilometres from where the Nepean and Grose rivers meet northwest of Sydney to its mouth at Broken Bay, where it empties into the Tasman Sea. But calling it a river understates what it actually is. Geologically, the lower Hawkesbury is a drowned valley estuary, an ancient river gorge that was flooded by rising seas at the end of the last ice age, roughly 8,000 years ago. Marine surveys have revealed the ghost of the old riverbed plunging 80 metres below current sea level near Broken Bay, with bedrock at the estuary entrance reaching 125 metres down. The surface waters themselves drop to 40 metres deep in places, deep enough to swallow a 10-storey building. The water runs dark brown with tannin, stained by the eucalypt forests that have shed leaves into it for millennia. As a result, visibility is often near zero. On a calm day, standing on the river's edge, you can see perhaps half a metre down before the water becomes an impenetrable murk. It's also important to note that this isn't some remote billabong in the outback. The Hawkesbury is just an hour's drive from the centre of Sydney, Australia's largest city, and yet below Wiseman's Ferry, the river twists through a vast sandstone labyrinth of gorges and forested cliffs, where road access simply ends. Entire sections of the lower river are reachable only by boat. The surrounding bushland is locked in national parks, and over 70% of the catchment remains undisturbed forest. You can stand on certain high banks and see nothing but sandstone and eucalypt stretching to the horizon, unchanged from what it looked like 10,000 years ago. The Hawkesbury's tidal for 140 kilometres upstream. Twice a day, the Pacific Ocean breathes in and out of the river system. Whatever lives in the sea can, in principle, enter the Hawkesbury. Bull sharks certainly do. Juvenile populations have been documented by New South Wales Department of Primary Industry shark scientist Amy Smoothie. Dolphins enter the estuary too. Seals occasionally appear, hauling out on river rocks. The boundary between ocean and river is porous, shifting with every tide. And it's deep enough, dark enough, wild enough, that if something wanted to remain hidden, the Hawkesbury would be the place to do it. The traditional custodians of this river, the Darug people, whose country encompasses the southern and western banks, have a name for it that predates European arrival by tens of thousands of years. They call it Jurubin, and they have stories about what lives in its deepest reaches. They've maintained a continuous relationship with Jurubin for approximately 50,000 years. Let that number just settle in for a moment. 50,000 years. The culture that has lived along this river witnessed the last ice age, watched sea levels rise and fall, saw the valley flood and become the estuary we know today. Their connection to this landscape is encoded in rock art that covers the sandstone walls throughout the catchment. There are over 800 recorded sites in the Popera National Park alone, with engravings dating back 3,000 to 7,000 years. And among these engravings, on the biggest bends of the river at Cateye, are images that tell the story of Gurungati, the great eel. Gurungati is a powerful creation ancestor spirit who dwells in the river's deepest places. According to Darug tradition, which has been documented through the collaborative Jurubin project with University of New South Wales historian Professor Grace Karskens, Gurungati is a gigantic eel being. And here's the question that sits at the heart of this case, the question that makes it more than just another cryptid hunt. What if a deep cultural memory maintained across 50,000 years encodes something real, something the river has always held? Because in 1912, when European settlers who had never heard of Gurungati started reporting strange sightings in the Hawkesbury, they were seeing something. And those sightings haven't stopped. The first verifiable newspaper account appeared in 1912 in Sydney's Evening News under the headline, "Was it the Bunyip?" A boating party on South Creek, a Hawkesbury tributary near Windsor, reported seeing a creature approximately 4 feet long, resembling an alligator. 4 feet, not the sea monster of later accounts, something relatively modest, glimpsed in the murky water, but strange enough to make the papers, and small enough to be almost plausible. 12 years later, in September 1924, the Windsor and Richmond Gazette published a letter titled "Seeing Things," from a man named W.J. Riley. He described watching a creature from the terrace at Windsor for 15 minutes in broad daylight. His account is specific, measured, almost technical. "We saw a big ugly thing, 2 foot 6 inches to 3 foot in depth, with a length of about 5 to 6 feet, and of a yellowish or sandy colour. It had a square fishtail, and it was a nasty looking animal. Local commentary dubbed it a Titanic seahorse. Again, nothing enormous, nothing implausible, but definitely something Riley had never seen before." And then the descriptions start to escalate. In 1945, a witness named John Nelson reported seeing an ugly, snake-like head raising 10 feet above the water on a neck 2 feet thick. As he watched, humps appeared as the body surfaced behind the head. The creature was dark grey with a pale yellowish-white underside. This wasn't a 5-foot oddity, this was something massive. 4 years later, in 1949, something happened, or was reported to have happened, that would become the most spectacular account in the Hawkesbury monster's history, and the least verifiable. The yarn goes something like this. On a property along the river's edge, somewhere in the middle reaches, the exact location was never recorded, or if it was, it's been lost. It's late afternoon. The sun's dropping behind the sandstone ridges that wall the valley. A bull had come down to drink. An Aberdeen Angus, probably 1,500 pounds, of muscle and bone. A huge big bastard, thirsty after a hot day grazing in the paddocks above the river. The water was calm, tannin dark as always, revealing nothing of what moved beneath the surface. The bull waded in up to its knees and lowered its head to drink. According to the account that circulated through the Hawkesbury communities and eventually made its way into the written record, what happened next happened fast. The water erupted. A head broke the surface, reptilian, massive, mounted on a neck described as 20 feet long and thick as a man's torso. The creature lunged forward with shocking speed, jaws open, and clamped onto the bull's shoulder. The huge bull bellowed, a sound of pure terror and confusion, and tried to wrench backwards, his hooves scrambling for purchase in the mud and river stones. But the creature was stronger, far stronger. Its body surfaced behind the neck, 30 feet of dark, scaled mass moving with serpentine power. It dragged the bull into the deeper water. The animal fought, thrashing, sending a spray that caught the fading light. For a moment, both creatures were visible. The bull's head above water, eyes rolling white with panic. And behind it, the humpback of something that had no business existing in 1949, or in any era humans had lived to witness. And finally, the river swallowed them both. The thrashing stopped. The water stilled. Men who witnessed the event came running from the property buildings. Drawn by the sound of the bull screaming, they found only disturbed mud at the water's edge, and a slick of red spreading slowly across the brown surface of the river before the current pulled it away. So that's the story. And here's what we know of it for certain. Nothing. No witnesses were ever named. No one came forward to say, I was there, I saw it happen. No property owner ever filed a report with local police about livestock loss. No newspaper ran a contemporaneous account. The bull's carcass was never recovered. Not unusual in a river system this large, but convenient for a story that might be more legend than fact. No physical evidence of any kind was documented. The account exists only in the retelling, passed from person to person, growing perhaps in the telling the way fishing stories do, until it became part of the Hawkesbury monster canon. It surfaces in the work of later investigators like Rex Gilroy, cited as an example of the creature's aggressive behaviour, its size, and its predatory nature. It's too dramatic to ignore entirely. A 30-foot creature lunging from the water to drag a bull from the riverbank is the stuff of creature features, of pulp novels of the day, of campfire tales designed to keep children away from the water's edge after dark. But it's also too dramatic to accept without verification. And there is none. What this 1949 account does, whether it happened or not, is mark a turning point in the Hawkesbury monster story. The modest, almost plausible sightings of the 20s and 30s have given way to something else entirely. The creature has grown in the imagination of the Hawkesbury communities. It's no longer a 5-foot oddity with a square fishtail. It's become a monster. And by the late 1970s, witnesses would start describing it in terms that matched a very specific extinct animal. Long neck, paddle-shaped flippers, humped body moving through the water with a serpentine motion. This describes, as much as a paleontologist can describe anything, a plesiosaur. The 1979 sightings are among the most frequently cited. In May of that year, the same month as the Keeley houseboat incident that we mentioned in the opener, a Sydney resident named Judy Morgan was watching water skiers through binoculars from a 50-foot bank east of the Hawkesbury River Bridge. She reported seeing 2 humps, roughly 3 feet tall, rising from the middle of the river. Below the surface, she could make out 2 pairs of paddle-like flippers, She watched for several minutes before the creature submerged and vanished. The reports continue through the decades. In 2000, at St Albans, a witness described a creature 25 to 30 feet long with a head a metre above the water. In 2009, the creature's most dedicated investigator, a man named Rex Gilroy, a legend in cryptozoology circles in Australia, who we'll come to shortly, claimed his own sighting of a 12-metre shape with a long neck near Wiseman's Ferry. And in 2017, the Hawkesbury monster entered the smartphone era. Fetty Ada, a 65-year-old kebab shop owner who was out on the water near Patonga with his family when they spotted something in the river. He filmed it on his phone, grainy footage of a dark shape moving through the water, something breaking the surface. He told Yahoo News Australia it looked human the way it lifted its head up. It looked over towards us like, who are these people? The video, as you could imagine, went viral. Local marine rescue volunteers reviewed the footage. Felicity Brownrigg, Secretary of Hawkesbury River Rescue, offered a deflating assessment. My guess would be that it's a seal. A seal. Not a plesiosaur. Not a surviving marine reptile from the Cretaceous period. Just a seal that had wandered into the estuary from the Pacific doing what seals do. But here's what makes the pattern of sightings compelling, even if most of them probably are seals or bull sharks or floating logs seen from an unfortunate angle in the murky water. They seem to cluster at specific locations along the river. Wiseman's Ferry, where the river narrows through sandstone gorges, is the most frequent hotspot. Then Mooney and Long Island, the Brooklyn area, Broken Bay and Pittwater, and as far upstream as Windsor. The geographic spread runs from deep inland to the open estuary. The sightings span more than a century, and most of the witnesses, particularly the early ones, had never heard of a Hawkesbury River monster before they saw something strange in the water. W.J. Riley in 1924 wasn't primed to see a creature. He was just a man standing on a terrace in Windsor who watched something ugly and yellow with a square fishtail for 15 minutes and couldn't make any sense of it. And that's the thing about this case. If we strip away the obviously embellished accounts, ignore the 30-foot creatures dragging bulls from the riverbank, you're still left with a core of sober, daylight observations by people describing something they couldn't identify in a river that is deep enough and dark enough and wild enough to hide almost anything. Rex Gilroy died in April 2023 at the age of 80. For 58 years before that, from 1965 until his death, he investigated the Hawkesbury River monster with an intensity that bordered on obsession. He was a cryptozoologist, self-taught, head of the Australian Unknown Animals Investigation Centre, based in Katoomba in the Blue Mountains. He and his wife Heather compiled hundreds of sighting reports over more than 5 decades. They conducted stakeouts along the river. They interviewed witnesses. They published in Nexus magazine and local newspapers. Over the decades, Gilroy developed a theory, and it was quite extraordinary. He believed the creatures were surviving marine reptiles from the Cretaceous period, breeding offshore in the Pacific and entering the river to lay eggs. He estimated a breeding population of 300 to 600 animals. Not a lone survivor. Not a remnant population clinging to existence. A thriving colony of animals that science insisted had gone extinct 66 million years ago. It seems to me that we do have a race of creatures that are officially extinct, yet they are still with us, he told reporters. I believe it's a marine reptile of some sort that scientists should really start taking an interest in. Gilroy discovered an Aboriginal rock engraving at Brisbane Waters near Gosford that he interpreted as depicting a plesiosaur-like animal. In 2009, he claimed his own sighting near Wiseman's Ferry, a 12-metre shape with a long neck moving through the water. He became the public face of the Hawkesbury monster investigation, the man who refused to let the mystery die, and indeed, without him, much of the information I've shared in this podcast episode wouldn't be possible. But the scientific community didn't take him seriously. How could they? His theory required 300 to 600 large marine reptiles to be breeding, feeding, and dying in waters adjacent to one of Australia's major cities, without a single body ever washing ashore, without a single bone ever being found, without any physical evidence whatsoever beyond witness testimony and ambiguous photographs. But Gilroy never wavered. For him, the witness accounts were evidence enough. The pattern was too consistent, too persistent to dismiss. December 14th, 1936. It was a hot summer morning. A group of young men had come down to the creek for a swim, seeking relief from the heat. 16-year-old George Lundberg waded in on the harbour side of the bridge, the water cool and murky around his legs. His friends were nearby, calling out to each other, mucking about, enjoying the day. And then Lundberg cried out, screamed. His friends turned, expecting a joke. Someone had grabbed his leg from under the water maybe, or he'd stepped on something sharp. But then they saw his face. The water around Lundberg had turned red. He was thrashing, trying to move toward the shore, but something held him down. Something in the murk beneath the surface had him, and it was pulling. His friend James Connor moved closer, trying to see what had happened. Through the churning, bloody water, he couldn't make out the creature itself. Just the movement, the power. And then for a brief moment, a tail, thick, muscular, swished above the surface before disappearing back into the dark water. Lundberg's left leg had been torn off below the knee. His friends dragged him from the water, trying desperately to stop the bleeding, to get him to hospital. But the damage was catastrophic, and the youth died soon after. The attack on George Lundberg happened in Throsby Creek, Newcastle, a tidal waterway that connects Newcastle Harbour. It's about 160 kilometres north of Sydney. It's similar to the Hawkesbury in its geography, a river system that breathes with the ocean, tannin dark water, deep enough in sections to hide what moves beneath the surface. But what attacked George Lundberg in Throsby Creek that summer morning in 1936 wasn't a mystery. It wasn't unknown to science. It wasn't a surviving plesiosaur or a creature that shouldn't exist. It was a bull shark. Bull sharks are among the most dangerous predators in Australian waters, not because they're the largest, but because of where they hunt. They can grow to 3.5 metres long, 1,500 pounds of muscle and teeth. They have the highest testosterone levels of any animal on Earth, and unlike most shark species, they can tolerate both salt water and fresh water, which means they enter river systems, estuaries, creeks, anywhere the tide reaches. They're opportunistic, aggressive, and perfectly adapted to murky water. When visibility drops to near zero, as it does in rivers stained brown with tannin, bull sharks don't rely on sight. They use electroreception, sensing the electrical impulses generated by muscle movement. They use hearing, detecting vibrations in the water. A person swimming in dark water, splashing, creating disturbance, or a bull coming down for a drink. That's exactly what a bull shark is designed to detect and investigate. Dr. Nicholas Lubitz of James Cook University has spent years researching bull sharks in Australian rivers. He's found them almost 100 kilometres inland in rainforest creeks and streams. As far as the Hawkesbury, further. As long as there is food, they'll go up there, he's noted. For decades, researchers believed the Hawkesbury was too far south to serve as a bull shark nursery. And then climate change shifted the baseline. Water temperatures rose. And suddenly juvenile bull sharks were establishing populations in river systems where they weren't supposed to be. Indeed, just 3 weeks before this recording, in late January 2026, Sydney experienced some of the heaviest rainfall in over a decade. And within 48 hours there were 4 separate shark attacks along the New South Wales coast. All of them were attributed to bull sharks. Bull sharks are real. They're confirmed in the Hawkesbury. They're savage, fast and powerful enough to drag a 16-year-old from the water. Or perhaps lift a houseboat from the river, or surface in a way that, seen from a distance in poor visibility, could easily be mistaken for something far more mysterious. A bull shark rising from murky water, its dorsal fin breaking the surface, its body moving with serpentine power through the shallows. That could be a plesiosaur. It could be a river monster. Perspective, distance and the human brain's tendency to fill gaps with pattern and expectation can turn the terrifying into the impossible. And that's just one of the species confirmed in the Hawkesbury. Fur seals enter the estuary from the Pacific. They're curious animals, playful. They have a habit of poking their heads above water to investigate boats and people. The 2017 Ada family video, the one that went viral, the one Fetty Ada described as looking human in the way it lifted its head up. Felicity Brownrigg of Hawkesbury River Rescue reviewed that footage and offered the simplest explanation. It was a seal. Another suspect is the long-finned eel. They grow to over 1.5 metres in the Hawkesbury system. Goannas swim too. They're strong swimmers, actually. And they can be startling if you're not expecting to see a 2-metre reptile cutting through the water. Dolphins enter the estuary regularly. Marine turtles occasionally appear. Large catfish inhabit the deeper sections. And at least one saltwater crocodile was caught in the neighbouring Nepean decades ago. A vagrant far outside its normal range, but proof that the unexpected does occasionally turn up. And then there's the river itself, manufacturing ambiguity with every tide. The Hawkesbury's environmental conditions actively conspire to create mystery. The water's dark brown, stained with tannin from eucalypt forests. Visibility drops to near zero in most sections. Tidal surges create unexpected surface disturbances, and boat wakes reflect off sandstone cliffs and come back at odd angles. Floating logs in deep water seen at dusk from a high bank become serpentine shapes. Your brain, designed to recognise patterns and detect threats, fills in the gaps. It turns ambiguity into certainty. And once legend embeds itself in local culture, confirmation bias ensures that every ambiguous sighting gets filed under monster. You see something strange in the water. You've heard the stories. Your brain makes a connection. You've just seen the Hawkesbury River monster. And this is how legends sustain themselves across generations. The sceptical position, as you can see, is adequate. But adequate isn't the same as complete. The Hawkesbury River isn't some shallow creek where every square metre has been surveyed and catalogued. It's a drowned valley estuary with sections that plunge 40 metres deep, deeper than Sydney Harbour's deepest holes, winding through sandstone gorges where road access doesn't exist, and vast stretches of undisturbed forest reach to the horizon. 70% of the catchment remains protected wilderness. Entire sections of the river are reachable only by boat. And it is connected directly to the Pacific Ocean. Whatever lies in the Tasman Sea can enter this river, twice every day with the tide. The ocean breathes in and out of the Hawkesbury for 140 kilometres inland. The confirmed ecology of this river already includes animals that weren't supposed to be there. Bull sharks are now breeding in a system that was considered too far south for juvenile populations until researchers discovered them anyway. Climate change shifted the baseline. Species ranges are expanding. What we thought we knew about what belongs in the Hawkesbury has already been proven, scientifically, wrong. And no systematic scientific investigation has ever been conducted into what actually lives in the deepest channels of the Hawkesbury. No sonar surveys specifically targeting unknown fauna. No environmental DNA analysis, the kind that can detect species from genetic traces left in the water. No sustained underwater camera deployment in the 40-metre depths, where visibility is zero and the water runs dark as ink. No coordinated effort to catalogue what exists in those drowned valleys that were carved when sea levels were lower, and Australia was a different continent entirely. Science hasn't proven that monsters exist, but science also hasn't bothered to look. The Hawkesbury runs dark and deep, in the narrowest gorges where sandstone cliffs rise 200 metres on either side, and the river drops 40 metres straight down. The water is the colour of a strong cup of tea. On a calm day, in good light, you can see perhaps half a metre down before everything becomes murk. And below that, we don't really know. Strewth. Thanks again for listening to another episode of Strewth. I'd really appreciate it if you gave the show a rating and left a comment. The other thing I'd be really interested to hear from you about is any personal sightings you might have had. Certainly about the Hawkesbury River monster. But about any cryptid, anything strange, any paranormal event you might have had. I'm planning on doing a series of bonus episodes relating to listener tales. So if you've got something crazy you'd like to share, reach out to me, strewthpodcast@gmail.com. If you're not a big fan of talking on a microphone, that's okay. You can just write your experiences and send those in to me, and I can give them the Strewth treatment and turn them into an episode. Later this week, I'll be releasing another bonus episode of Strewth. A fascinating follow-up to A Murderer Takes Tea, the episode about the phenomenal Florence Broadhurst and her unfortunate demise. A couple of weeks after I released that episode, my phone pinged. I got a message from someone who was in the story, the first copper at the scene, and there's a few extra details that he thought I might like to hear about. I'll be sharing those with you soon, here on Strewth. Thanks for listening.